The parking lot light was dying. I could hear it buzz every few seconds, flicker, then settle back to that orange-brown glow that made everything look older than it probably was. St. Bridget's Chapel sat about 30 feet ahead of me, dark except for a single fixture over the side door. Marshal Stevens stood next to his truck with the engine still running, holding a clipboard and a key ring that looked like it had been collecting keys since the 80s. I'd taken the job because it was 3 weeks of work and the pay cleared my rent. That was it. Marshall had called it after-hours site monitoring on the phone, which sounded fine. Vague, but fine. I'd done temp work before, mostly building checks, minor repairs, inventory counts. This was supposed to be the same thing. Marshall handed me the clipboard. "You'll need to read this first." The top sheet was titled Night Access Rules in all caps, printed on paper that felt a little too heavy for a standard printer. I held it under the lot light and started reading. The first section was straightforward. Access permitted between 8:30 p.m. and 11 p.m. only. No entry before or after those hours. No exceptions. I figured it was some kind of insurance thing. Churches probably had weird liability windows. The second section listed what I was supposed to check. Interior doors, fire exits, smoke detectors, electrical access points, plumbing shutoffs. Standard stuff. I'd done most of it before on other jobs. The third section was where it got weird. Do not interact with after-hours volunteers. Do not acknowledge their presence. Report sightings to management immediately. I read that line twice. After-hours volunteers. In a building I wasn't supposed to enter except during a specific 3-hour window at night. I looked up at Marshall. "What's an after-hours volunteer?" He didn't blink. "Shouldn't be any. That's why you report them." "But if there shouldn't be any, why is it on the sheet?" Marshall shrugged. "Policy. Chapel's been here a long time. A lot of people think they still have keys." That didn't really answer the question, but he said it in a way that made it clear he wasn't going to say more. I kept reading. Do not enter the basement. Do not open the basement door. If basement door is found open, exit building immediately and contact management. I looked at the chapel again. It was small, probably seated 100 people max. White clapboard siding, narrow windows with pointed arches, a steep roof with a little bell tower at the front. It looked like every other New England chapel I'd ever seen, except maybe a little more run down. The paint was peeling near the roof line, and one of the windows had cardboard taped over a cracked pane. "Why can't I go in the basement?" "Structural issues," Marshall said. "Floor's not safe. We're handling it separately." Okay. That made sense. I'd worked buildings with condemned sections before. You just stayed out of them. "What if I need to check the water shutoff?" "That's usually in the basement." "It's in the sacristy. All the access points you need are on the main floor." I nodded and kept reading. "In the event of auditory anomalies, bells, voices, footsteps, note time and location. Continue work. Do not investigate source." I stopped there. Auditory anomalies? "Old building," Marshall said. "Pipes knock, wood settles. You know how it is." I did know how it was. I'd worked in plenty of old buildings. Pipes knocked, foundations shifted. You heard things that sounded like footsteps or voices, and it was just air moving through vents or floors expanding. But I'd never seen it written down on a rules sheet before. Usually people just told you not to worry about it. The last section was short. Report completion by text message immediately upon exit. Attach photo of signed checklist. Payment authorized after 7 consecutive compliant nights. 7 nights. That was the trial period Marshall had mentioned on the phone. After that, it was supposed to be 3 weeks of the same routine. I could do 7 nights. I'd done worse. "Any questions?" Marshall asked. "Who do I text?" He pointed at the bottom of the sheet. There was a phone number printed under his name. "That's me. I'll confirm receipt. You're good to start tonight if you want." I checked my phone. 8:23. I had time. "Yeah, tonight's fine." Marshall pulled the key ring off his belt and handed it over. There were 4 keys on it. He pointed to each one as he talked. Front door, sacristy, electrical panels, same key for all of them. And the office, but you won't need that. Got it. You have a flashlight? I pulled my headlamp out of my jacket pocket. I always kept one. You never knew when a building's lights would be half dead or wired wrong. Marshall nodded. Good. I'll be around if you need anything, but you shouldn't. It's straightforward. He got in his truck and backed out before I even started walking toward the chapel. I watched his taillights disappear past the street corner, and then it was just me and the building and that buzzing lot light. I walked up to the side door and tried the first key. It didn't fit. The second one slid in clean and turned hard, like the lock hadn't been oiled in a long time. The door opened inward, and I stepped into a narrow hallway that smelled like dust and old hymnals. There was a light switch just inside the door. I flipped it, and a single ceiling fixture came on. Yellowish light, dim but steady. The hallway ran about 15 feet before opening into the main chapel space. To my left was a door with a small wooden sign that said, Sacristy. To my right was another door, unmarked. I checked the clipboard. The checklist started with interior doors, so I tried the unmarked one first. Locked. I put my hand on it and pushed gently, testing the frame. Solid. No give. I made a note on the checklist, right hallway door, secure, and moved on. The sacristy door opened easy. Inside was a small room with a counter, a couple of cabinets, and a closet with vestments hanging in clear plastic. There was a window on the far wall covered with a pulled shade. The electrical panel was mounted next to the closet, a gray metal box about the size of a briefcase. I checked the main chapel next. It was smaller than I'd thought from outside. Maybe 20 rows of pews, a center aisle, a simple altar up front with a wooden cross on the wall behind it. The windows were too high to see through from floor level. There was another door on the far side near the altar, and I walked over to check it. Locked. I tried all 4 keys, but none of them fit. I made a note, front right door, secure, no access, and kept moving. The fire exits were marked with the standard red signs. One in the back corner, one near the front on the left side. Both opened outward when I pushed the bar, and both had clear paths. I checked them off. Smoke detectors were easy. There were 6 of them, all ceiling mounted, all with steady green lights. I didn't see any electrical access points in the main chapel, so I went back to the sacristy. The checklist said to open each panel and confirm no visible damage, corrosion, or disconnected wiring. I unlocked the sacristy panel with the 3rd key and swung the door open. Breakers all looked fine. Labels were handwritten in faded ink. Sanctuary, hall, office, exterior. Nothing looked burned or loose. I took a photo for my own records, closed it, and locked it again. My phone said 9:20. I'd been inside for about 30 minutes. I still needed to check the plumbing shutoffs, which were supposed to be in the sacristy closet according to the checklist. I opened the closet. The vestments were pushed to one side, and behind them I could see a copper pipe running down the wall with a shutoff valve about waist high. I turned the handle a quarter turn to make sure it wasn't seized, then turned it back. It moved smooth. I made the note. That was it. I'd covered everything on the list. I stood in the sacristy with the clipboard in one hand and my pen in the other, scanning the checklist one more time to make sure I hadn't missed anything. The bell rang. Just once. A single clean strike. Close and sharp. Like someone had pulled the rope and let it swing into the bell once before catching it. The sound filled the whole building for a second, then faded fast. I didn't move. I stood there in the sacristy with my pen still touching the checklist, listening. The building was quiet. No footsteps, no voices, no creaking wood or knocking pipes, just silence. The bell wasn't powered. I'd checked the breaker labels. There wasn't a line for it. And even if it was powered, automated bells didn't sound like that. They sounded mechanical. This had sounded like someone struck it by hand. I walked out of the sacristy and into the main chapel. The bell tower was above the front entrance, and the rope hung down through a hole in the ceiling near the back pews. I stopped next to it and looked up. The rope wasn't moving. It hung perfectly still, no sway, no twist. I reached out and touched it. Dust came off on my fingers, and the rope didn't feel like it had been pulled recently. It felt stiff and dry. I stood there for probably a full minute, just staring at the rope and listening to the quiet. The building didn't make another sound. No settling, no pipes, nothing. I looked back toward the sacristy, then up at the bell tower again, then down at the rope in front of me. The building had just done something it shouldn't have. I needed to keep moving. That was the whole thing. Follow the checklist, do the job, text Marshall, go home. I pulled out my headlamp and clicked it on. The chapel light stayed on, but I figured I'd need it later anyway. And I didn't want to walk back out to the truck for it. The strap felt snug around my forehead. I clipped the completed checklist to the board and set it on the nearest pew. Rule 3 kept running through my head. The one about after-hours volunteers. Don't interact, don't acknowledge, report immediately. I hadn't seen anyone, but that bell didn't ring itself. Probably. I didn't know. Maybe there was some mechanism I'd missed, some timer or sensor that made it strike at certain intervals. Old buildings did weird things. That's what I told myself. I walked down the center aisle toward the altar, my boots loud on the wood floor. The headlamp beam cut through the dimness and made everything past it look darker. The chapel lights were too weak to reach the corners. I counted my steps without meaning to. 16 from the back pew to the front. The altar sat plain and simple against the back wall. Just a wooden table with a white cloth and the cross mounted above it. No candles, no books, nothing fancy. The cloth had a pressed look to it, the kind that comes from sitting untouched for a long time. I dug into my jacket pocket and found the quarter I'd grabbed from my truck's cup holder on the way in. Massachusetts State Quarter, the one with the Minuteman on it. The rules said to leave an offering if you heard the bell. I'd read that line twice before starting tonight, and it seemed strange then too, but Marshall's paperwork had been specific. 1 coin, any denomination, placed on the altar cloth within 10 minutes of an auditory event. I set the quarter down near the front edge of the cloth. It made a small metallic sound when it touched. The headlamp beam caught the coin and threw a tiny reflection onto the wall behind the cross. I stood there for a second, hands in my pockets, looking at the quarter and feeling stupid. This wasn't a normal site monitoring job. Normal jobs didn't have rules about offerings, but the pay was $800 a week for 3 weeks. That covered rent and then some. I'd done stranger things for less money. I turned to head back up the aisle, and my headlamp beam swept across the pews as I moved. The light skimmed the back row and caught something. A shape. A seated shape in the last pew on the left side, exactly where someone would sit if they'd been watching me the whole time. I stopped mid-step. My hand went to the headlamp, and I angled it back toward the pew. The beam found the spot again. Empty. Just worn wood and a hymnal holder on the back of the pew in front of it. I stood there, not moving, my breath loud in my ears. The shape had been there. I'd seen it. Dark coat or jacket, maybe a hat. The outline of shoulders. Definitely a person. But the pew was empty. I swept the light slowly across the whole back row. Nothing. I moved it to the second row, then the third. All empty. The hymnals sat in their holders. Dust hung in the beam where it cut through the air. My heart was going faster than it should have been. I made myself breathe normal and kept the light moving across the chapel. The fire exits were still closed. The sacristy door was still open the way I'd left it. The bell rope hung motionless near the side wall. Nobody was here. I'd checked the whole building. The only unlocked entrance was the side door I'd come through, and I would have heard it open. Old hinges made noise. I walked back up the aisle, headlamp pointed forward, watching the pews on both sides. My boots hit the floor with a rhythm that sounded too loud. 17 steps back to where I'd left the clipboard. I picked it up and held it against my chest, the metal clip cold through my shirt. The chapel felt bigger now, the high ceiling and the dark corners and the windows I couldn't see out of. I didn't run, but I moved fast, straight to the hallway, straight to the side door. My hands fumbled with the lock and I had to stop and make them steady before the key would turn properly. Outside, the air felt cold and clean. The parking lot lights buzzed the same as before. My truck sat exactly where I'd left it, the only vehicle in the lot. I locked the chapel door behind me and pulled on the handle twice to make sure it caught. The walk to my truck took about 10 seconds, but it felt longer. I got in, dropped the clipboard on the passenger seat, and started the engine. My hands were shaking, not a lot, but enough that I noticed. I gripped the wheel and waited for the shaking to stop. It didn't. I put the truck in drive and headed out of the parking lot. The chapel disappeared in my rearview mirror. I didn't look back. The next day, I called Marshall around 2 in the afternoon. I'd spent the morning trying to sleep and not managing much of it. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that shape in the pew, the outline of it, the way it had been there and then hadn't. He picked up on the third ring. Marshall Stevens. It's Nathan Pearson, I said, from the St. Bridget's job. Right. Got your text last night. Checklist looked complete. His voice had that same measured tone from when we'd met in the parking lot. Businesslike. Yeah, I finished everything, I said, but I wanted to report something. An auditory event. A pause. Then, okay, what did you hear? A bell, single strike, around 9:20. I kept it factual, no editorializing. It came from the bell tower. The rope didn't move afterward, it was covered in dust. Uh-huh, he didn't sound surprised. Anything else? I hesitated. Saying it out loud was going to make it sound worse than it had been. When I was leaving, I thought I saw someone in the back pew just for a second. I checked again and nobody was there. Marshall made a sound that might have been a sigh. You checked the whole building before that, right? Yeah, every door, nobody inside. Then nobody was inside, he said. Old buildings make noise, Nathan. Pipes knock, wood settles, shadows move when you're tired. That's why the rules mention auditory anomalies. It's normal. The bell sounded pretty clear, I said. Mechanisms get old. Could be a counterweight issue, could be wind in the tower. I'm not a bell expert. He paused. Look, you did the job right. You followed the checklist, you reported what you heard, you left on time. That's what I'm paying you for. The rules said to leave an offering after an auditory event, I said. I did that. Just wanted to confirm that was right. Yeah, that's fine. Old building, old traditions. Keeps the community happy. His tone shifted a little, got more persuasive. You're doing good work. Pays better than most site monitoring in the area, right? It is, I said. And you've only got 5 nights left. 5 more checks and you're done. $2,400 total. He let that sit for a second. Jobs like this don't come around often. I know, I said. So we're good for tonight? I looked at the notes I'd written on the back of an envelope that morning. Bell, 9:20 p.m., shape and pew, empty on second look. The handwriting looked shaky. Yeah, I said. We're good. Great. Text me when you're done tonight. Same process. He hung up. I set the phone down on my kitchen counter and stared at it. Marshall's explanation made sense on the surface. Buildings did make noise. Shadows did move. I'd been tired, I'd been rattled by the bell, and my headlamp beam had probably caught a weird angle on the pew and made me see something that wasn't there. That's what I told myself. But the rules kept coming back. Don't interact with after-hours volunteers. Don't acknowledge them. Report sightings immediately. Marshall had written those rules. He'd printed them on that heavy paper and put them first on the clipboard. He'd said after-hours volunteers shouldn't exist, but he'd made a whole policy about them anyway. In the offering, 1 coin, any denomination, within 10 minutes of an auditory event. That wasn't a standard site monitoring procedure. That was something else. I made coffee and sat at my table and tried to think it through. The pay was good. The job was easy. 3 weeks of walking through an empty chapel and checking doors. I'd done harder work for less money. But that pew had been empty. I kept seeing it. The shape there, then gone. The way the headlamp beam had found nothing on the second pass. 5 more nights, that's all. 5 more checks and I'd be done. I drank my coffee and told myself it was fine. I got to the parking lot at 8:27. Same flickering light. Same empty asphalt except for my truck and Marshall's. He wasn't waiting by his vehicle this time, just leaned against the chapel's side door, scrolling through his phone. He looked up when I killed the engine. "Second night," he said. Not a question. "Yeah." He pocketed his phone and handed me the clipboard. Same heavy paper checklist, blank except for the date printed at the top in that same odd typeface. "Any issues yesterday?" I thought about the bell, the shape in the pew, followed the procedures. "Good," he pushed off the wall. "You'll be fine." That was it. He walked to his truck and left, taillights disappearing down the access road before I'd even gotten out of my cab. I grabbed my headlamp from the passenger seat and clipped the clipboard under my arm. The keys felt heavier tonight, probably just me. The lock gave easier this time. I'd figured out yesterday that you had to push in while turning. The hallway smelled the same. Dust and old hymnals and something else underneath. Maybe mildew. I hit the light switch and the yellow fixture buzzed on. 15 feet of hallway, sacristy door on the left, unmarked door on the right that had been locked yesterday. Except tonight it wasn't. The door sat open maybe 4 inches, not wide, just cracked, enough to see darkness on the other side and the top edge of concrete steps heading down. I stopped walking. The padlock hung from the hasp, shank open, dangling against the door frame. Like someone had unlocked it, opened the door, then hung the lock back up to make it look secured from a distance. Rule 2 was specific. Do not enter or open the basement door. Exit immediately if found open. I stood there with my hand on the keyring, looking at that 4-inch gap. Marshall had said structural issues, unsafe flooring. All the access points I needed were on the main level. The rule didn't say why I should exit if it was open. Just that I should. I could leave. Call Marshall. Tell him I found it open and followed protocol, but then I'd lose tonight's payment. Maybe the whole job. Marshall had been clear about compliance. The door hadn't opened itself. Someone had unlocked it, which meant someone had a key, which meant maybe Marshall's after-hours volunteers theory wasn't completely wrong. I looked down the hallway toward the main chapel. Nothing moved. The building sat quiet. I reached out and pulled the basement door shut. The wood was heavier than I expected. Solid, old construction heavy. The latch caught with a clean metallic click. The air changed. Not gradually. Instantly. Like I'd just sealed a freezer. The hallway temperature dropped maybe 15 degrees in the span of a breath, and I could see it. Actual mist forming when I exhaled. I took a step back. Then I heard it. Something wet dragging across concrete. Slow. Methodical. The sound of something heavy being pulled across a rough surface 1 inch at a time, and between each pull, a pause. Patient. It was coming from behind the door, from the basement stairs. My hand was still on the key ring. I watched the door. It didn't move. The latch stayed caught. But the dragging sound continued. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. Pause. Moving laterally now, like whatever it was had reached the bottom of the stairs and turned. I made myself step back again. Then again. I didn't turn around until I'd reached the sacristy door. plumbing. That's what Marshall had said. Knocking pipes, settling wood. I forced my breathing steady and clicked on my headlamp. The checklist. I had a checklist. I'd closed the door, which meant the building was secure, which meant I could continue the inspection and finish the job. I went through the sacristy first. Electrical panel, same as yesterday. Breakers all in position, no visible damage. I took the photo. The plumbing shutoff in the closet turned smooth. Check. Check. The smoke detectors in the main chapel all showed green. The fire exits pushed open clean. The front right door by the altar stayed locked. Check. 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 I was filling in the boxes on the clipboard standing near the back pews when I remembered there was a storage room I hadn't checked yesterday. Marshall's rules didn't specifically list it, but the clipboard had a line for additional inspection notes, and I figured it wouldn't hurt to be thorough. The storage room was off the hallway, past the sacristy before you reached the main chapel. The door wasn't locked. I pushed it open and swept my headlamp across the space. Shelves on 2 walls, folding chairs stacked in the corner, boxes labeled Christmas and Easter in faded marker. And in the center of the room, directly under a dark water stain on the ceiling tiles, a 5-gallon bucket. I walked over. The bucket was maybe half full, the water inside dark and still. I looked up. The stain spread across 3 tiles, brown at the edges, nearly black in the middle. Active leak. Had to be. My first thought was to dump it. The bucket was half full, which meant it'd overflow eventually, probably soon. If I dumped it now and put it back, at least I'd buy the building some time before the next overflow. I was already reaching for the handle when I stopped. Rule 4. Do not adjust, move, or remove any devotional items, furniture, or objects left in place by previous occupants. I straightened up. A bucket under a leak wasn't a devotional item, it wasn't furniture. It was just a bucket catching water because the roof was failing. But it had been left in place. I stood there staring at it for probably 30 seconds, my hand still extended, not quite touching the handle. Then I pulled back. I'd bring a shop vacuum tomorrow. Suck the water out without moving the bucket. That felt like a reasonable compromise. I wrote it in the additional notes section. Bucket in storage room, half full, active leak above. Will address next shift. It was 10:38 when I finished writing. I clipped the pen to the board and walked back toward the side exit. I passed the main chapel entrance and had just reached the hallway when I heard it. A knock. Gentle. 3 taps, evenly spaced, coming from inside the chapel. I stopped, then a voice. Male, muffled, like he was speaking through the door or from the other side of the room. Hey, I'm cold. Can you let me out? My hand went to the chapel door handle on reflex. Then I froze. I hadn't seen anyone come in. I'd checked the whole building. All the doors were locked except my entry point. The fire exits only opened outward. The voice came again. Please, it's cold in here. My fingers touched the metal handle. It was warm under my palm. But I hadn't seen anyone come in. I pulled my hand back. I cracked the door open maybe 4 inches. The sanctuary looked empty. Pews in rows, altar at the front, white cloth draped over it. My headlamp beam swept across the center aisle. Then I saw the footprints. Wet. Glossy. Leading from the altar straight down the center aisle toward where I stood. Fresh enough that the light caught the moisture. I pushed the door open another 6 inches and angled my headlamp down. The prints weren't shaped right. They looked like something had dragged itself forward on soaked hands instead of feet. 4 elongated marks in each print. Fingers, maybe. Or something that left 4 grooves. The spacing was too wide for a person crawling. The prints overlapped in places, smeared together where whatever made them had paused or shifted weight. I counted 7 sets between the altar and the 4th pew from the front. My breath came shallow. The air still smelled like dust and old hymnals, no trace of water or mildew. just the dry staleness I'd walked through twice already. The bell rang. One strike, clean and sharp, filling the whole building the same way it had the first night. The sound pressed against my chest and faded slow. I stood in the doorway with my hand still on the warm handle, staring at the glossy trail that shouldn't exist. Rule 6 said leave an offering within 10 minutes of an auditory event. 1 coin, placed on the altar. I forced myself not to run. My boots made hollow sounds on the floor as I walked down the center aisle. I kept my eyes on the altar and tried not to look at the wet prints, tried not to think about how fresh they looked, how the light reflected off them. 16 steps from the back pew to the front. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the quarter I'd grabbed from my truck before coming in. Massachusetts State. Same as the one I'd left last night. The white cloth looked clean under my headlamp. No stains, no watermarks. I placed the quarter next to the first one, near the front edge where I'd put it yesterday. The metallic sound seemed louder this time. Up close, I saw the earlier coin looked wrong. Too clean, polished, almost. Like someone had scrubbed it with steel wool until it shined. The surface caught my headlamp beam and threw it back brighter than a normal quarter should. A thin ring of pale crust circled it on the cloth, maybe 1/8 of an inch wide, yellowish white like dried salt or mineral deposits. The kind of residue you'd see around a leaky pipe or on concrete where water evaporated over and over. I leaned closer. The crust didn't look old. It looked recent, formed since I'd placed the coin maybe 24 hours ago. My new quarter sat beside it, dull and normal and covered in the usual grime from sitting in a cup holder for 6 months. I stepped back from the altar. The wet prints were still visible in my peripheral vision, leading from where I stood back toward the door. I didn't look directly at them. 17 steps back up the aisle. I kept my pace steady, not fast, not slow, just the same rhythm I'd used walking in. My hand found the door handle, still warm. I pulled it open, stepped into the hallway, and let it swing shut behind me with a soft click. The hallway felt warmer than the chapel. The yellow ceiling fixture buzzed faintly. I walked to the side exit, turned the lock, and stepped outside into the parking lot. The door latched behind me. I tested the handle twice. Secure. My truck sat under the flickering orange light, same spot as always. I got in, placed the clipboard on the passenger seat, and started the engine. My hands weren't shaking this time. That bothered me more than if they had been. On the 3rd day, Alex Little showed up while it was still light. I pulled into the parking lot at 6:45 p.m., planning to sit in my truck for an hour and a half like I had the previous 2 nights. Maybe eat the sandwich I'd picked up on the way. A black Audi SUV sat near the side entrance, new enough that the paint still looked glossy under the early evening sky. A man stood by the chapel door, hands in the pockets of a dark jacket. Tall, maybe 6'2". Short, sandy hair. He watched me park. I turned off the engine and got out. He walked over before I reached the chapel. Confident stride, business casual under the jacket. "Nathan Pearson?" he said. "Yeah." "Alex Little, site manager." He didn't offer his hand. "We need to talk about your reports." I didn't know I'd been filing reports. I'd been texting Marshall a photo of the completed checklist each night with "done" as the message. That was it. "Okay," I said. Alex gestured toward the chapel. "Walk me through what you're seeing." I unlocked the side door and led him into the hallway. The yellow light buzzed overhead. He followed me to the storage room. The bucket still sat under the stain. Water level looked about the same, maybe an inch higher. "This," I said, pointing up, "active leak. Ceiling tiles are compromised. The bucket's half full." Alex glanced at it for maybe 3 seconds. "Old building," he said. "Probably condensation. We're demoing the annex Monday anyway. Condensation doesn't pool like that." He looked at me. Sharp blue eyes, the kind of look that said he'd already decided I was wasting his time. "The annex is coming down regardless," he said. "That's the rear section. Storage, offices, basement access. This room included. What else?" I led him to the sacristy and opened the electrical panel. "Breakers are functional," I said, "but the labels are faded. I can't confirm what circuits they're actually controlling without testing." "Has anything failed?" "No." "Then they're functional." He stepped back into the hallway. "Anything else?" I thought about the bell, the shape in the pew, the voice behind the door, the wet footprints. "There have been some auditory anomalies," I said. "Pipes?" "Maybe. Old buildings make noise." He said it the same way Marshall had, same dismissive tone. "Is there anything structurally unsound that would delay the schedule?" "I don't know." His expression shifted, less patient. "You don't know?" "I'm not a structural engineer," I said. "I can check doors and breakers and shut off valves. That's what the checklist covers. Anything beyond that isn't something I'm qualified to certify." Alex pulled out his phone, swiped twice, and turned the screen toward me. A schedule, dates and tasks in a grid. Monday's line read, "Annex Demo, Peralta Contract 0700. "We have crew starting Monday morning," he said. "Demo permits filed, inspector signed off. We need your clearance to proceed. I haven't finished the monitoring period." "You've done 2 nights. That's enough to confirm the building's not on fire, and the pipes haven't burst." He lowered the phone. "Sign off on the checklist. Marshall will process your payment for the full contract." I looked at him, tried to figure out if he actually believed what he was saying or if he just didn't care. "The rules say 7 consecutive nights," I said. "The rules are a formality. Marshall wrote them to satisfy the Archdiocese's insurance requirement. You've done your due diligence. Sign the final sheet, and we're clear." "There's still the bucket," I said, "and I haven't traced the source of the water. If there's a pipe issue..." "There's no pipe issue." His voice got harder, faster. "There's an old building that's been sitting empty for 8 months, collecting moisture and settling. We're converting the front chapel into condos. The annex is rubble by Tuesday. Whatever's leaking doesn't matter. It matters if it's connected to the main structure. It's not. You don't know that." He stared at me for a long moment. The hallway felt smaller. "What's your concern here?" he said. "Specifically." I thought about how to answer that. How to explain that I couldn't certify a building where bells rang themselves and voices came from locked rooms and something left wet trails shaped like hands dragging across stone. "I can't sign off on something I can't explain," I said. Alex's jaw tightened. "Marshall said you were thorough. He didn't say you were difficult." "I'm just following the checklist." "The checklist is a guideline. You're a temp contractor, not a city inspector. Your job is to confirm the building's not actively falling apart so we can move forward." He put his phone away. "Sign off tonight. I'll make sure Marshall processes your full payment by Friday. I'm contracted for 7 nights. And you'll be paid for 7 nights. But we need your signature tonight." He stepped closer. Not threatening exactly. Just occupying more space. "This project has deadlines, investors, contracts with penalties if we miss milestones. You holding up demo over a bucket of water creates problems that cost real money. That's not my concern." "It is if you want to work again." His tone stayed level, professional, but the meaning came through clear. "Marshall's connected to half the site management firms in Boston. You make this easy, you'll get called for other jobs. You make it difficult, you won't." I didn't say anything. Alex pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket and held it out. "This is the final sign-off sheet. Same checklist you've been using. Fill it out tonight, text Marshall the photo, and we're done. Simple." I didn't take it. He set it on the edge of the nearest pew. "Think about it," he said. "I'll be back tomorrow at 7 if I don't hear from Marshall that we're clear. We can have this conversation again, or you can make the smart choice tonight." He walked past me toward the side exit. His footsteps echoed in the hallway. The door opened and closed. I stood in the chapel entrance holding my clipboard, staring at the folded paper he'd left. Through the high windows, the sky had started to darken. Maybe 20 minutes until 8:30. I thought about Marshall saying the job paid better than most site monitoring, about Alex saying I wouldn't work again if I made this difficult, about the wet footprints leading from the altar and the voice asking to be let out and the coin scrubbed clean with a ring of pale crust around it. I picked up the folded sign-off sheet. Same format as the checklist I'd been using, same line items, just labeled Final Clearance at the top instead of a date. I folded it again and put it in my jacket pocket. Outside, Alex's Audi was already gone. The parking lot sat empty except for my truck under the flickering orange light. I walked to the driver's side and got in, sat there with the engine off, watching the chapel's side entrance. Marshall would call tonight or tomorrow morning. He'd ask why I hadn't signed off. Maybe he'd say Alex was right, that 2 nights was enough, that the full payment was still on the table if I just sent the photo. Maybe he'd say something else. Either way, I had 3 more hours until my shift ended. I pulled out my phone and checked the time. 7:18 p.m. Cornered from both sides. That's what it felt like. Marshall and Alex pushing me to sign off and move on. The building itself doing things that shouldn't be possible, and leaving evidence I couldn't explain. I thought about just leaving, getting in the truck and driving home and texting Marshall that I was done, keep whatever partial payment he thought was fair. But I thought about my rent, about the jobs I might not get if I walked away. I put my phone in the cup holder and stared at the chapel. $2,400 for 7 nights. 5 more nights to go. I'd be back at 8:30 to start night 3. I got there at 7:10 that night, earlier than usual. Alex's paper was still folded in my jacket pocket where I'd shoved it that afternoon. I hadn't looked at it again. Marshall's truck wasn't in the lot. Nobody was. Just my Ford and the sodium light buzzing overhead, casting everything in that orange-brown wash that made the whole parking lot look underwater. I grabbed my headlamp and clipboard and walked to the side door. The keys felt lighter tonight. That bothered me more than when they'd felt heavy. Inside, the hallway smelled wrong. Still dust and old hymnals, but underneath that was something else. Salt, maybe, or rust. I hit the light switch and the yellow fixture buzzed on. The sacristy door was closed. I'd left it open yesterday. I moved past it toward the storage room, already checking the first box on the clipboard even though I hadn't confirmed anything yet. The storage room door was open about 6 inches. I pushed it wider with my knuckles and stepped inside. The bucket was gone. Just gone. The shelves were still there, the folding chairs stacked in the corner, the boxes labeled Christmas and Easter in faded marker. But the 5-gallon bucket that had been sitting directly under the ceiling stain, half full of still dark water, wasn't there anymore. I aimed my headlamp at the spot where it had been. The floorboards were dark, not damp. Dark, swollen. The wood had that bloated look it gets when it's been soaked through and left to sit. The grain raised and splitting in hairline cracks that ran parallel to the boards. 3 planks showed the damage, radiating out from where the bucket had sat. The discoloration was deep, like the water had been dripping there for weeks instead of 2 days. I crouched down and touched the nearest board with 2 fingers. Dry. Cold, but dry. The wood didn't give under pressure. It was solid, just ruined. Someone had moved the bucket. That was the only explanation. Alex, maybe, or Marshall. Someone with keys who'd come in during the day and decided the leak wasn't worth documenting, except the floor shouldn't look like this. Not from 2 days of dripping. I stood up and backed out of the storage room, pulling the door shut behind me. My phone was in my jacket pocket. I fished it out and checked the screen. 1 bar. I watched it drop to none while I stood there. I tried opening my messages anyway. The screen just spun, loading nothing. I shoved the phone back in my pocket and kept moving. The sacristy was fine. Panel locked, vestments hanging in the closet, shut-off valve still smooth when I tested it. I took the photo, checked the boxes, moved into the main chapel. 16 steps down the center aisle. The altar looked the same. White cloth, wooden cross mounted above it, 2 quarters sitting near the front edge, both of them wrong now. Both too clean, too bright, each with a thin yellowish ring of crust on the cloth around them. I didn't leave a third. The smoke detectors were green. The fire exits pushed open clean. The front right door by the altar was locked, same as always. I finished filling in boxes and checked my watch. 8:27. That's when I heard it. A click, metallic, sharp. Then a scrape, slow and deliberate, wood dragging across wood. I knew what it was before I moved. I walked fast toward the hallway, clipboard still in my hand, headlamp beam bouncing off the walls. When I reached the hallway entrance, I stopped. The basement door was open. Not 4 inches this time. A foot. Maybe more. The padlock hung loose from the hasp, the shackle threaded through but not closed. The door itself sat ajar, darkness spilling out from the gap, and the air coming through smelled wrong. Sour, briny, sharp and organic, the way low tide smells when it's been trapped in a closet for weeks. Salt and rot and something underneath that I didn't have a word for. I stood there for 5 seconds, maybe 10, just breathing through my mouth and staring at the gap. Then I walked forward, grabbed the edge of the door with my free hand, and pulled it shut. The wood was cold, slick almost. The latch clicked into place and I looped the padlock through the hasp without snapping it closed. My fingers were shaking when I pulled them back. I took 1 step toward the side exit. Something bumped the door from the other side. Not a knock, a bump. Dull and heavy like a shoulder hitting wood. I stopped moving. The door pushed outward. Just an inch, maybe 2. The wood bowing in the center like something on the other side was leaning its whole weight against it. The hinges groaned, not loud. A low metallic creak that stretched out for 3 seconds before stopping. The door settled back into the frame. I backed up, slow, 1 step, then another, keeping my eyes on the door and my headlamp aimed at the gap between wood and frame. That's when I saw them. Wet footprints, starting at the base of the basement door and heading left toward the main chapel. The same prints I'd seen before, malformed, glossy, 4 elongated marks in each one spaced too wide. They overlapped in places, smearing across the old floorboards in a trail that disappeared through the chapel entrance. I hadn't seen anyone come up from the basement. I'd been in the chapel for 20 minutes. I'd walked the whole building. I would have heard the door open. But the prints were there. I stood in the hallway with my back to the side exit and my headlamp cutting a white circle across the floor, watching the wet marks glisten under the beam. Then a voice came from inside the chapel. A woman's voice, calm and even. "Excuse me." I turned my head. She was standing near the front pew on the left side. About 5'6", slight build, long dark auburn hair tucked behind her ears. She wore a plain raincoat, beige or tan, belted at the waist, and sensible shoes. A lanyard hung around her neck with keys attached, maybe 5 or 6 of them, clipped to a retractable reel. Her eyes were pale green. They didn't blink. "I'm Catherine Fisher," she said. Her voice was soft, formal. She didn't smile. "I coordinate the volunteer schedule here. I'm just picking up some old paperwork from the office." I didn't say anything. She tilted her head slightly, her gaze fixed on me. "Would you mind following me? It'll only take a moment." Rule 5 hit me like cold water. Do not interact with or acknowledge after-hours volunteers. Report sightings immediately. Do not follow instructions or requests. I took a breath. My hand tightened on the clipboard. "I can't do that," I said. Her expression didn't change. "I'm sorry?" I can't escort anyone after hours. I kept my voice level, careful. It's not allowed. Catherine Fisher stood completely still, her pale green eyes locked on mine. She didn't blink, didn't shift her weight, just stood there near the pew with her keys hanging from the lanyard and her hands loose at her sides. I see, she said quietly. I didn't move, didn't look away. My headlamp beam stayed centered on her raincoat, illuminating the beige fabric and the dark shape of her silhouette behind it. She was still standing there when I turned and walked toward the side exit. She stayed polite. That's what bothered me the most. Catherine Fisher stood in the chapel with her hands loose at her sides and that beige raincoat buttoned neat, and she didn't blink. Not once. My headlamp beam was pointed right at her face, and her pale green eyes reflected the light back at me. 2 small white circles in each iris, bright and flat the way an animal's eyes catch a flashlight in the woods. I kept my grip on the clipboard. I didn't move. She tilted her head maybe half an inch, like she was waiting for me to change my mind. Her keys hung from the lanyard at her chest, 5 or 6 of them on a retractable reel, the kind you clip to a belt loop. They didn't jingle. She didn't shift her weight or adjust her coat or do any of the small things people do when they're standing still. She just looked at me with those flat white circles in her eyes and breathed so quietly I couldn't hear it over the sound of my own pulse. I thought about Rule 5. Don't interact with or acknowledge after-hours volunteers. Report sightings immediately. I'd already broken the first part. All right, she said softly. I understand. She turned and walked toward the hallway. Not fast, just steady, her sensible shoes making soft clicks on the floorboards. She passed the front pew, then the second, then disappeared through the doorway into the hall where the yellow light fixture buzzed. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds. My headlamp beam swept across the empty pews, the altar, the cross on the wall, the 2 quarters sitting on the white cloth with their yellowish rings. Then I heard her stop. No footsteps, just the absence of them. She'd been walking and now she wasn't. I moved toward the hallway, slow, keeping the clipboard in front of me like it would do anything. When I reached the doorway, I angled my headlamp left and saw her standing outside the office door. The one Marshall's 4th key was supposed to open, but I'd never tried. She had her head turned slightly, like she was listening to something behind her. To me, probably. She didn't look back. Marshall already signed off, she said. Her voice was calm and even, like she was reading from a script. You should stop interfering. I opened my mouth, closed it. My hand tightened on the clipboard until the metal clip dug into my palm. The work is scheduled, she continued. The permits are filed. Your clearance isn't required. I didn't say anything. I just watched her stand there in the hallway with her back to me, her dark auburn hair tucked behind her ears, her keys hanging silent from the lanyard. She reached for the office door handle, turned it. The door opened inward with a faint creak, and she stepped through without looking back. The door closed behind her with a soft click. I stayed in the doorway. I counted to 30 in my head. The hallway stayed quiet except for the buzzing light fixture and the faint sound of my own breathing. Then the bell rang. 1 strike, clean and sharp. It filled the whole building and faded slow. I checked my phone. 8:41. That was early. The other nights it had rung closer to 9:20. Rule 6. Leave an offering within 10 minutes of an auditory event. I turned and walked back into the chapel. 16 steps down the center aisle. My headlamp beam bounced off the pews and the altar and the white cloth. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the last quarter I had. Massachusetts. Same as the others. I'd grabbed a handful from my truck's cup holder before coming in tonight, but I'd left the rest in the vehicle. This was it, my last one. I placed it on the altar next to the 2 that were already there. The sound it made was wrong, too loud, too metallic, like it hit something harder than cloth. I looked at the 3/4 lined up near the front edge. The rings around them weren't salt. I'd thought they were salt, or maybe mineral deposits from water. But up close, under the headlamp beam, they looked different. Softer. Textured. The pale yellowish-white crust had tiny bubbles in it, like foam that had dried in place. Foam from something organic. Something wet. I stared at them for maybe 5 seconds. Then I heard the wet steps behind me. Slow. Deliberate. The same dragging scrape I'd heard before, but this time it was moving. 4 elongated marks hitting the wood in sequence, then dragging forward, then hitting again. It crossed the floorboards from the back of the chapel toward the center aisle. The wood didn't squeak. It should have. Old floors always squeak. I didn't turn around. I backed up instead, 1 step, then another, keeping my eyes on the altar. My headlamp beam stayed fixed on the 3/4 and their foam rings. I counted 17 steps backward up the aisle, same as always, and when I reached the doorway I turned and moved fast into the hallway. The side door was 10 feet ahead. I walked toward it, grabbed the handle, pulled. It didn't move. I pulled harder. The handle turned, the latch disengaged, but the door stayed shut. I put my shoulder into it and shoved. Nothing. It was like the frame had been sealed. I stepped back and looked at the gap between the door and the frame. That's when I saw it. Chain. Thick steel chain wrapped twice around the handle on the inside and looped through a bracket I hadn't noticed before, mounted into the wall at chest height. The chain was padlocked at the end. The padlock was new. Brass with a thick shackle. I turned and checked the sacristy. Maybe the window. I got 3 steps before I saw Catherine Fisher standing near the hallway entrance. Exactly where I'd been a minute ago. She was watching me. Her pale green eyes caught my headlamp beam and reflected it back. She didn't say anything. She just lifted one hand and gestured toward the basement door. The door was open. Not 4 inches. Not a foot. All the way open. The smell hit me. Sour and briny and sharp. Salt and rot and low tide trapped in a closet. Catherine Fisher's hand stayed raised, palm up, like she was showing me the only way out. I looked at the basement door, at the darkness beyond it, at the wet footprints leading from the threshold into the chapel. Rule 2. Do not enter or open the basement door. Exit immediately if found open. Not because it was unsafe, because it was quarantine. Whatever was down there wasn't supposed to come up. I turned and walked into the sacristy. My headlamp swept across the counter, the cabinets, the closet with the vestments. I moved past the electrical panel and stopped at the corner near the window. There was a stone basin there, waist high, mounted on a pedestal. I'd seen it before but hadn't paid attention. Baptismal font, probably. It had a wooden lid, round and heavy, sitting on top. I grabbed the edge of the lid with both hands and slid it to the side. The smell that came up made me gag. Worse than the basement. Thick and organic and wrong. The basin was full. Dark liquid. Almost black. It moved in slow folds, like oil, but thicker. The surface didn't ripple. It just turned over on itself. One fold collapsing into another, without sound. I stepped back. I didn't touch it. I looked at the wall behind the font. There was a metal panel there, painted white, about the size of a breaker box. It had a small red label at the top. Fire suppression. Manual override. I grabbed the panel edge and pulled. It swung open on a hinge. Inside was a valve wheel, bright red, with a pressure gauge above it. The gauge read 0. I grabbed the wheel with both hands and cranked it clockwise. The pipes groaned, loud, rattling, like the whole building was waking up. Then the sprinklers opened. Black water blasted down from the ceiling. Not mist, not spray. Thick streams like someone had turned on a fire hose. It hit the floor and splashed up the walls and soaked everything in seconds. The smell was overwhelming. Rot and brine and something else I couldn't name. I heard Catherine Fisher make a sound. Not a scream. just a sharp intake of breath. The wet steps stopped. Then something shrieked, high-pitched and furious and not human. It filled the whole building, louder than the bell, louder than the water hammering down from the sprinklers. The bell started ringing, not one strike, not three. Over and over, frantic and irregular, like someone was pulling the rope as fast as they could. I ran into the chapel. The black water was pouring down, drenching the pews and the floor and the altar. My headlamp barely cut through it. I reached the altar and grabbed the 3/4, my fingers slipping on the wet cloth. The foam rings dissolved under my hand, just melted away, like they'd never been there. I stared at the quarters in my palm. 3 coins, 3 nights, 3 offerings, a contract, something that kept whatever was in the basement from crossing the altar line. I turned and ran back to the sacristy. The baptismal font was still open, the dark liquid still folding over itself. I threw the quarters in. They hit the surface and sank without a splash. The liquid churned, fast, violent, like something was thrashing underneath. Then it stilled, completely, flat and smooth and motionless. The shrieking stopped. The bell stopped. The black water kept pouring from the sprinklers. I heard a rattle from the hallway. Metal on metal. The chain at the side door was moving, links sliding through the bracket, and then it fell. The whole thing just dropped to the floor with a crash. I ran. Through the sacristy, into the hallway, past the basement door that was still open and spilling that sour smell. I grabbed the side door handle and pulled. It opened. I stepped outside. The air hit me, cold and clean and normal. I sucked in a breath and kept walking across the gravel lot toward my truck. My boots crunched on the stones. My jacket dripped black water. The clipboard was still in my hand, soaked through. I got to my truck and turned around. The chapel lights were on, all of them. Bright yellow light pouring through the high windows. I hadn't touched a switch. I walked closer, not all the way back to the building, just close enough to see through the windows. The pews were full, rows of figures standing shoulder to shoulder, facing the altar. Maybe 30 of them, maybe more. They didn't move. They just stood there, perfectly still, like a service had started and they were waiting for it to begin. Catherine Fisher wasn't among them. I got in my truck, started the engine, drove. The Newburyport Police Department was open 24 hours. I walked in at 9:37, soaked through and probably looking worse than I felt. The desk sergeant was a solid guy, maybe 50, with close-cropped black hair going gray at the temples. His nameplate read, Schmidt. He looked at me, looked at the water dripping off my jacket and said, "You all right?" "I need to file a report," I said. He pulled out a clipboard, different from mine, clean. I told him about the bucket, the leak, the wet floor, the mold, the basement door left open, the chains on the exits. I didn't mention the bell or the footprints or Catherine Fisher's eyes. I stuck to what could be verified. Structural hazards, safety violations, trespass. Stanley Schmidt took notes. He asked questions. Time, location, condition of the doors, whether I'd seen anyone enter or exit. An officer came over. Younger, maybe late 20s, black hair and a tight bun. Her nameplate read Bishop. She asked me to walk through it again while she documented everything. I did. Same details, same timeline. Officer Deborah Bishop wrote it all down. She was thorough. She asked about the chains twice, about whether the basement door had been forced or unlocked with a key. I said unlocked. She wrote that down. When we were done, Stanley Schmidt handed me a copy of the report and a case number. "We'll send someone to check it out," he said. I nodded. Took the paper. Left. I called Marshall at 6 the next morning. Told him I was done. He tried to talk me into finishing the week. Offered me the full payment anyway. I said no. He asked why. I told him to check with Alex Little. Marshall didn't call back. The sprinkler damage was worse than I thought. The black water had soaked into the walls and the floors and the ceiling tiles. When it dried, it left stains, dark patches that spread and darkened over the next few days. My report triggered scrutiny. The city sent an inspector, Crystal Lewis. She was no-nonsense, sharp-eyed, and she didn't like what she saw. She brought in a structural engineer, Alexander Bates, older guy, methodical, with a measuring tape and a camera. They found mold, severe mold, black mold in the walls, in the floor joists, in the annex structure, structural deterioration, rotted beams, compromised foundations. The developer halted the conversion, tried to push back. Crystal Lewis didn't budge. 3 weeks later, the property went back to the diocese, sold at a loss. St. Bridget's Chapel stayed closed. I never heard the bell ring again.